Welcome to Perspectives on Islam. My name's Elaine Ellinger, and the subject today is Islam at the workplace in non-Islamic countries. We'll begin with the doctrine. The foundational doctrine of Islam, as most people know, includes the Quran, but also the Hadith, which are the stories and traditions about Muhammad. And to put it all in context, it's best to have a good biography of Muhammad. I recommend this one from the 8th century. And there's a lot of information in there you won't find elsewhere. But because the Quran is not in chronological order, and because many of the revelations correspond to what was happening in his life, it is very helpful to have a good biography of Muhammad. So many people think that it's only what's in the Quran that is Sharia, but actually it's everything that is from Muhammad's life, his example, and the Quran together. And everything, all human activity, legal, moral, ethical, falls into one of 5 specific categories. It's obligatory, recommended, permitted, discouraged, or forbidden. And obligatory would be Muhammad said, you have to do this. Forbidden would be he said, you should not do this. And permitted is something that he didn't really remark on one way or another. So the word Sharia is actually in the Quran, and it's in ayah, verse 45:18. We set you, Muhammad, on the clear way of faith. So that's why his example is so important. Now, there's this compendium of Sharia. Sharia is not found in a book, but for the sake of convenience, you can take this one with you and not have to go through the Quran and all the Hadith to find an answer to things that are well understood. And I'll refer to this book a few times as I go through this, in addition to the Hadith and the Quran. So what is a follower required to believe? They're required to believe what sacred law tells them that they must believe. It says, none of you believes until his inclinations conform to what I have brought, meaning Muhammad. And the Quran says, when Allah and his messenger have decided a matter, no believer, male or female, has a choice in their affair. The highest authority are the Quran and Hadith, but there are others. There's analogical reasoning, the opinions of the companions, the scholars, and the community, the Ummah. So this statistical work was done by Dr. Bill Warder some time ago. And he discovered that the amount of doctrine that was actually about the non-Muslim is quite surprising, more than half the Quran. And I did double check it with my own Quran, and I got the same number. So this is why the non-Muslim should know what it says, because much of it is actually about them. So for a very brief history of Muhammad's career, the time of legislation, the establishing of Sharia, occurred between his prophethood and his death. So for the first 13 years, he was in Mecca, and he was not very successful. He upset a lot of people. He said that they would be cursed and go to hell. Their ancestors would go to hell if they didn't follow him. And so he wasn't very popular, but he was married to a very wealthy and powerful woman. And he had his uncle Abu Talib as protectors. But when they died, he felt it was time to leave, and he migrated to Medina. And at that time, he adopted Jihad. Now, there were 3 tribes of Jews in Medina, and within 5 years, all 3 tribes were either exiled or executed. The last tribe was executed, every man killed. So there was a major difference. There was no violence in Mecca before the migration, but after Mecca, he became a military leader and politician. And this marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. It is that significant. And he divided the people there into the Ummah, the people who followed him, and the people who did not. So the Ummah exists to this day. The world was basically divided, so far as Islam was concerned, into the believers and the unbelievers. And this is the expansion of the Arabian Peninsula during the time of Muhammad. And this was done through conquest, and it expanded right out to Spain at one point in the Ottoman Empire. So most people have heard of the 5 pillars of Islam. Here they are from a hadith. O Messenger of Allah, tell me of an action that will gain me admittance to paradise and keep me away from hell. He said, and I've added the numbers here, worship Allah, and that is the Shahada, the profession of faith, to establish prayer, pay charity, fast Ramadan, and perform the Hajj to Mecca if they can. And he said, shall I not tell you the head of the matter? It's pillar and pinnacle. It is jihad. So many people don't realize that. And he says, shall I not tell you the basis of all that? And he took hold of his tongue and then said, restrain this. So how does all this tie into the workplace today? Well, Quran 9:33, it is he, Allah, who has sent his messenger with guidance and religion of truth to manifest it over all religion, although they who associate others with Allah dislike it. So this is anyone who does not follow Allah and Muhammad, those are the others. In 2009, the New York Times reported that although Muslims accounted for 2% of America's workforce, they filed nearly 25% of religious discrimination claims. Now, this isn't accurate because the percentage was actually about 1% of America's workforce. And in 2015, 1.1% of Americans are Muslim, and they accounted for 40% of religion-based workplace complaints with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. So, there could be other contributing factors. And here's a possibility. So this is an organization called the Council on American Islamic Relations. They have an employer's guide to Islamic religious practices, and they have numerous publications, such as Addressing Bullying in Schools, Know Your Rights as a Student, Your Rights as an Airline Passenger, Your Rights as an Employee, Your Rights While Protesting, Your Rights with Law Enforcement. Now, most employees and employers don't have an organization that they can call on to assist them. But CARE actually began in 1994. They prosecuted their first case in 1995. It was in regards to a hijab. Now, this is a charitable organization. They're tax exempt. And they recently, actually not that recently, 7 years ago, launched an app. So people have on their phone an app. And if they have a complaint about something, they can just immediately file it with CARE. And when they report an incident, this is what they get when you click on the app. And you can say where you live anywhere in the world, that you feel there's been a violation of your rights in the news media or bias in a publication. And you can report all of these things. And here's some advice. And this is, I believe, the Ohio CARE branch. There's about 33 different branches of CARE across the US. And they recommend you inform the offending party, that you put it in writing, that you save memos, you create a paper trail, but also that you contact the CARE attorneys at the first sight of a problem, that you do not sign any documents or resign, you do not ask to be transferred, you do not request mediation, and make sure to file an incident report on the website. Yes, CARE Ohio has successfully resolved hundreds of employment discrimination cases over the years. And as you can see, the numbers continue to go up. It says in 2023, they had over 8,000 complaints, which was the highest number in 28 years. Well, it's very easy to make a complaint, but they call this hate. Now, is it hate? Is that really a fair thing to say, that because there's a difficulty at the workplace that it's generated because of hate? There could be other reasons. Now, CARE is actually named as a terrorist organization in the United Arab Emirates. And recently, an ex-employee has claimed that it accepts foreign funding. They are the largest Muslim civil rights group in the US and have about 33 local chapters, as you can see. The judge has ordered, in regards to that former employee, that CARE must reveal their donors. They celebrated after the Hamas brutal attack on October 7th on Israel. Now, as I was saying, they're a charitable organization. Donations are tax deductible, but they're also something called Zakat eligible, and that's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Now, CARE California alone lists 130 directors and a revenue of over 17 million. And this is Washington, D.C. branch. with 26.5 million. Here's an example of a case that was taken. A woman was asked to remove her hijab to book a photo for jail, and booking photo, it's called. And this was the second incident in 2 years. So that's not a lot, but nevertheless, they took it to court. And the settlement included a financial compensation, $90,000, and establishing a new policy. So I suppose if somebody arrives in a burqa and they have to have a photo taken, they'll make arrangements for them. So what is the Zakat? Well, Zakat is actually, it's been around since the 7th century. It's an Islamic tax. And really, this is if you look at how it's spent, it's a socio-political economic system of governance. And it's enforced to this day. And two particularly noteworthy sections here are for bringing hearts together. This is to persuade people that Islam is a good thing, and for new converts to Islam. But also this category, the cause of Allah, fi sabilillah, which is military. And I'll read it for you here. Now, this is from Reliance of the Traveler, the compendium I showed you. And it says the 7th category is for those fighting for Allah, meaning people engaged in military operations for whom no salary has been allotted in the roster, volunteers. And also that it's obligatory that the Zakat must be distributed equally amongst the 8 categories. So here's an example. This is a Canadian organization, something like CARE, and they are funded, they're eligible to collect Zakat. They've been authorized by the Canadian Council of Imams to collect under the fi sabilillah category. That's the cause of Allah. And they offer legal services. They're successful in presenting the Muslim viewpoint in media, either by writing to the editor or by paid articles. And they also supply publications to schools. They have letter writing campaigns to government and unions and things like that. So here's an example from Germany of organizations, Islamic organizations, and the growth over the last few decades. It's quite substantial. To go on with the Canadian organization, they offer legal assistance in the workplace. And this is from their website, that they frequently collaborate with partners such as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And their lawyers have appeared in multiple courts, including human rights tribunals and the Supreme Court of Canada. And they also have numerous publications telling people what their rights are and how employers should behave. So the 10 categories of workplace challenges, and I will provide the relevant doctrine and examples. There was a survey done, and the survey showed that 70% of managers encountered religiosity at work by 2019. And here's the survey, and this is by Firm Europe, is the name of the company. And they posed a lot of questions in their survey to employers. And what they found, that most employers feel that they should not have to provide a prayer room or grant special leave to fit with the Islamic calendar, that they should not have to adapt their work schedules to fit with Islamic prayer times, and that employees should not be permitted to refuse to carry out a task that is forbidden by Sharia law, that they should not be able to refuse contact with coworkers and business partners for religious reasons. And a large majority believe that employees should leave their religion at home when they come to work. And 95% of employers oppose the shunning of women and Jews at the workplace. Well, the survey, now this is from their website, found that over 50% of Western corporates had to handle Islam-related workplace issues on an occasional or regular basis, which included interference by external religious representatives. And in the US and Europe, thousands of lawsuits have been filed against employers for alleged discrimination. And this is a book Leslie Shaw wrote, and this goes along with that survey. So the areas of contention were prayer, Ramadan, dress and appearance, halal, gender segregation, pork and alcohol, body rituals, physical contact, proselytizing, and jihad. And we'll go through each of those one at a time. Beginning with prayer, 29% of managers face prayer-related demands, prayer rooms, ablution facilities. 70% of managers reported praying on the job. 32% of employers reported demands for scheduling accommodation and absences. 26% face demands for dedicated prayer rooms. Now, the doctrine here, the Quran, says to guard strictly the prayers, especially the middle prayer, and that there should be prayers at eventide, when you rise in the morning, in the late afternoon, when the day begins to decline, at the two ends of the day, the approach of the night, the decline of the sun, the darkness of night, before the rising of the sun, before its setting, and during periods of the night and the ends of the day. Well, that's not really that structured. How did you figure that out 14 centuries ago? Well, you did it by the sun. And it says in ancient times, one merely looked at the sun to determine the various times of day for prayer. In modern days, there are printed daily prayer schedules and plenty of apps. But clocks have only been around for a few hundred years, and people managed just fine for centuries before that by looking at the sun. So missing prayers is considered a serious lapse of faith, but make-up prayers are possible, and to do it as soon as possible or recite the missed prayer as part of the next prayer. So making up missed prayers is obligatory, and at the beginning we were saying is obligatory, permitted, forbidden. So it is obligatory. But a Muslim who misses a prayer out of unconcern cannot by that fact alone be considered an unbeliever. And the view that a prayer purposely missed cannot be made up is incorrect. So we'll look at some hadith, because those were the Quran I showed you. Now some hadith. It says, the messenger of Allah, that's Muhammad, was asked about a man who slept and missed a prayer. He said, well, pray when he remembers it. So they were sitting with Muhammad, and he said, if you can avoid missing through sleep or business a prayer, you must do so. But his wife said that Muhammad himself missed the night prayer for some reason, pain or anything else. He would observe 12 rakas the next day. Now, how did he go about doing that? This is called the principle of Darura. Necessity overcomes obligation and makes the forbidden permissible, because, people are fallible. They can't do everything perfectly all the time. And of course, that is recognized. And it comes up several times in the doctrine. This is Quran 16:115. So if halal food, Islamic schools, Islamic finance, insurance, or mortgages are not available, then Darura applies, and a Muslim is free to choose non-Sharia alternatives and cannot be pressured to accept only Islamic alternatives. And this is important to note, because, when authorities are approached by a few people saying you need to do this for us because this is a religious requirement, and they accommodate that request, well, now all Muslims are going to be pressured to take the Islamic option, where before they could take whatever option they wanted. So when these are approved, they actually limit the options that are available to the Muslim. So from Reliance of the Traveler, it says there's no harm in giving a misleading impression if it is required by an interest countenanced by sacred law. Why do I mention this? Well, it's because people often aren't aware, they aren't informed that there is a principle of Darura, that things don't have to be done perfectly all of the time. So it also says that outright lying is permissible in 3 cases: war, settling disagreements, and a man talking with his wife or she with him. And the deception, such as omitting important information to leave an erroneous impression, is preferable to lying, but it is permissible to lie when the goal is permissible, and obligatory if the goal is obligatory. So if something is considered obligatory in Islam, then it is permissible to lie. So prayer, the employers found, disrupts workplace efficiency and team dynamics. And the case study was Arian's company. And the employees were demanding multiple prayer breaks during work hours. And the company found there was $1 million in annual lost productivity. 21 employees were terminated after protest. The lawsuits were dismissed. And in Geneva Airport a few years ago, a group of 30 Muslims prayed loudly in the entrance hall, but the staff did not dare to intervene for fear of provoking a violent incident or being accused of Islamophobia. So this is about 30 Muslims right here, and you can see that that would be very disruptive. But also there's the Adhan, which is the call to prayer, and that's been going on for some time in Dearborn Mosque. That's a large Muslim population in that city now, more than half. This is the US. And what they've found is in the last 20 years, the community has really transformed the cultural landscape, not only with signs in Arabic everywhere, but also the amount of restaurants, et cetera. Now, Israel has recently stopped the adhan. They've confiscated the loudspeakers. And it was happening in a few communities, but when they broadcast it in Tel Aviv, people found it quite disruptive. Now, this is happening in many communities in the UK, the call to prayer on loudspeakers. And this is from an article. A fellow had talked to a friend, an ex-Muslim. Now, when they wanted to bring it into Newham, there was some pushback. And he said he had escaped persecution in Pakistan. And he said in Pakistan, he explained that the adhan, the call to prayer, had been used to intimidate non-believers while simultaneously pressuring Muslims to drop all they were doing and go and pray right now. So Ramadan. CARE itself conducted a study in 1997 and found that 42% of employers were willing to implement flex time to accommodate people at that time. And in the doctrine, it says in the Quran that Ramadan is important, and in the hadith that past sins will be forgiven for those who perform it. So, absolutely, Ramadan is recommended. But what employers found is reduced productivity during fasting, especially in physically demanding roles, operating equipment or vehicles. It was actually described as something like a hangover because people don't eat all day and then they're up all night. And the case study in Renault, France, found there were health risks and slowed production. Now, CARE took a case to court where someone had been asked for accommodation at Ramadan and it was refused. But what the employers have found that there's an increased workload on non-Muslims, and it strained workplace relationships, operational incidents, and safety concerns. And in Nice, France, a young Muslim waitress was beaten up at a bar because she served alcohol on the first day of Ramadan. Now, that's a non-Islamic country, but she was beaten up there. And in Germany, which is also a non-Islamic country, there were 3 children in the class that were required to fast. And these are 10-year-olds in grade 5. And the whole class was told they couldn't drink because the 3 children couldn't. And what the doctrine says, what the Reliance of the Traveler, the handbook, classic manual of Sharia I showed you, says is that a child of 7 is ordered to fast and at 10 is beaten for not fasting. Now, this poor man here, he's a Hindu in Bangladesh, and he was killed because he left his restaurant open on Ramadan. And people being attacked at Ramadan because they're eating, and this is non-Muslims, happens quite frequently. So this is a CARE publication, and they've written unwelcome and excluded. And, is it really fair to say that someone is unwelcome just because there's some difficulty at work? But there's a woman who decided to wear a niqab to work. She hadn't been originally, but she decided that she would. And a niqab is a complete covering where only the eyes are visible. And her employer said to her, "You look more like an Arabian Night." Now, he might have been just teasing, but it would call to mind, the nights they would have just this little slot for their eyes. He could have just been teasing her. And on another occasion, some of her colleagues were inviting her to their Christmas gala, saying, come on. And she was not happy about this. So the Quran says that they are not to choose disbelievers for friends in place of believers. The Quran says this 13 times, that Muslims should not take unbelievers as friends. Now, I hope some of them do, but they're not supposed to. And what the survey found was that in French hospitals, there are objections to nativity scenes at the hospitals. And this is a Canadian sheik, and he's made a video here about Christmas. And he says, there are those who will say to them, Merry Christmas. By saying that, you are approving of it. If a person were to commit every major sin, committing adultery, dealing with interest, lying, murder, if a person were to do all of those major sins, they are nothing compared to the sin of congratulating and greeting the non-Muslim on their false festivals. So you can see where that would create some, bad feelings on the other side. They might be feeling unwelcome and excluded now if this is how their wish to celebrate Christmas is treated. So dress and appearance survey results, 75% of Belgian employees opposed religious garments at work. And the doctrine says nothing about hijabs, actually, or burqas. What it says is, and I translated this from the Arabic to make sure we had this accurate, and it says that they must draw their veils over their chests. And another verse says they should bring down over themselves part of their outer garments. And the hadith is more strict. It says, it does not suit her, a woman, that she displays her parts of her body except this and this, and pointed to his face and hands. So in Michigan here, there was a lawsuit again against a sheriff where he was trying to take a booking photo of someone without her hijab. And CARE launched a federal lawsuit over that. Now in Toronto, Ontario, that's Canada, there were some women who, because of their ankle-length skirts, hijabs, neck scarves, they posed a risk. This is a courier establishment. And the women had to climb 6-meter ladders, navigate open metal staircases, and place boxes on a conveyor belt. And they filed a complaint. Now, the employer saw that as a risk, and they did not. So a rather famous case is this one, Abercrombie and Fitch, which ruled in favor of the complainant. And she was denied employment because of a look policy. So they had a policy at how they wanted people to look at that place. And she wanted to wear her hijab. And this was said at the interview. And they said, well, no, they didn't want to accommodate that. And so CARE took it to court. And the court ruled in favor of the complainant, the plaintiff. But the heading here is in favor of women everywhere. And I have to say, is this really in favor of women everywhere? Now, what the Quran says is that to bring down part of their outer garments, that is more suitable, that they will be known and not be abused. And depending on the translation, this is from the Arabic, abused, but it could be annoyed, harassed, hurt, given trouble, depending on the translation. But given trouble. So this is actually a matter of national security, it's turned out, because the teachings are that if a woman is not veiled, then she's available for assault. And they're finding this is a real problem, particularly in Europe. And this is a former MP saying he knows women who are living in problem areas where they're wearing veils to pretend that they're Muslim so that they won't be assaulted. Now at work, we've seen several times, this is called religion and it's protected category, so accommodations must be made. And this is a woman in 2003, and she was there happily for 12 years, but in 2015, she decided to wear some religious garb. And she was a customer service representative, so right on the front line. And the employer said, well, he'd rather not have, he'd rather have a secular workplace. And so he offered her, another position where she wouldn't be required to wear a uniform. She would get the same pay, work schedule, benefits, but she rejected the transfer and was terminated. So he did argue it. CARE took it to court, and it cost $100,000. Now, the judge did rule in his favor because he preferred to have a secular workplace, and certainly schools are supposed to be secular, but that's a lot of money, $100,000. So, this is something to note. Now, religion is not allowed in public schools in Canada. The schools are supposed to be conducted on a strictly secular and non-sectarian principle. And there should be no religious dogma or creed. So why are we having hijab days in school? Because when it goes to court, it's called religion. But when it goes to school, now it's called culture. So if it was called religion at school, it wouldn't be permitted. If it was called culture at court, it wouldn't be permitted. But it's called both. And on TikTok, it's called fashion. And in Afghanistan, it's called oppression. Halal simply means lawful under Sharia. It doesn't mean food. Haram is something that is forbidden. So when you see halal on a label at your supermarket, halal food, there are many things that can be halal. But what the doctrine actually says is forbidden to you are the flesh of swine, and whoever is forced, here's the principle of Darura, whoever is forced by hunger with no inclination to sin, then Allah is forgiving and merciful. The principle of Darura applies, and they can eat it. And the Hadith says there, there's a lot more that is considered haram than just, eating the flesh of swine. It says some people will consider illegal sexual intercourse, the wearing of silk, the drinking of alcoholic drinks, and the use of musical instruments as lawful. Well, according to Islam, the use of musical instruments is not lawful. And Allah will destroy them during the night, and the mountain will fall on them. He will transform the rest of them into monkeys and pigs, and they will remain so till the day of resurrection. So in Iraq here, we have this young boy who's being beheaded for listening to Western music. And that is Sharia. So demands have been made for halal-only meals in staff canteens, in schools. In French public schools, the parents were demanding halal meals exclusively and saying, well, it's cheaper if you just get them all halal, right? And this caused conflicts with secular policies and tension over cultural imposition. And there was criticism of favoritism. And we're having halal in Washington state schools in the US. So in France, the secular policies were reinforced. But you can get halal travel packages, and for food, it's wanted to have farm to fork. So all the way from the farm being halal, to the processing being halal, to the shop being halal, and the food being halal, wanting everything halal. Gender segregation, 60% reported refusals to work with a colleague of the opposite sex. And what the Quran says, and this was addressed to his wives, but his wives were to serve as an example for the other women, that when you ask them, his wives, for something, ask them from behind a partition. And the Hadith also says that the best rows for men are the front rows, and the best rows for women are the back rows. So that's segregation. And what the studies found was that this undermines team cohesion and authorities. And French airlines found that male employees were refusing to take instruction from female supervisors, and disciplinary measures were taken. Now in Venice, a Muslim porter refused to take instructions from his female superior. In Paris, male Muslim drivers refused to shake hands with female colleagues, but even refused to drive a bus that had been driven by a woman on the previous shift. And in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, during the visit of a Middle Eastern dignitary, female staff at the university were told to wear long sleeves and not to shake hands with him. So this is an excellent book. It's in German, and it's called What's Happening in Our Schools, and this is in Europe. And this woman from this article gives an example, and she says, while male teachers are still in a relatively good position, women sometimes have to endure massive hostility. When students want to insult or offend us, they usually do so using sexualized foul language. And I won't read this, but you can read it for yourself here. And she also hears provocative calls such as Allahu Akbar. They ask her, do you like Islam? Do you like Muslims? And if she gives a bad grade or asks someone to hand in their cell phone, almost always the students played the racism card, and their parents would also get involved. So pork and alcohol, 20% of managers complaining of overt religiosity identified refusing to carry out a task as problematic. Now, what the Quran actually says is only forbidden to you are like the flesh of swine. But whoever is forced by necessity, neither desiring nor transgressing, there's no sin on him. Darura, again, they can go ahead and eat it if there isn't anything else. And, I'll say, people with special diets, vegetarians and such, they make do with just taking what's there that they're able to have. So Quran also says that intoxicants must be avoided so that you may be successful. So the Hadith says the same thing. Every intoxicant is forbidden, and certainly that's good advice, eh? And he who drinks wine and dies while addicted to it will never be given a drink in the hereafter in paradise. But you notice here it says forbidden to you. that you must avoid it. It doesn't say anything about handling it if you're a cashier in a supermarket. It doesn't say anything about serving drinks to others if you're working in an airport. This is your behavior. But nevertheless, here we have a woman who was a flight attendant on an airplane, and she got her job. Everything was going fine, and for the first year and a half. And then she took a closer look, maybe had one of those little booklets about what is and is not permitted in her newly found faith. And she discovered that she could not consume alcohol, but her faith didn't even permit her to serve alcohol to others. Now, we didn't see that, did we? We were just looking at the doctrine there. So a German retail chain found that Muslim cashiers were refusing to handle pork or alcohol products and reassign people whenever possible. So this woman here, the flight attendant, a coworker was serving alcohol in her place. And then when she started to work with another person, they didn't want to do that for her anymore. And that's when she made a complaint. But you can see that this is putting more work on others. And it's understandable somebody wouldn't want to have to be doing that for her all of the time. So body rituals. Now, this is very interesting. It certainly affects hospitals a lot. And the survey found that patients were refusing to be washed by nursing staff, claiming that only their spouses were authorized to cleanse them. And patients with injured right hands refused to eat with their left because this is recommended that they eat with their right hand. So this obliged nurses to feed them while other patients had to wait. Now, the Arabic here, I looked very closely, there is no requirement to grow a beard. And beards are something that come up quite often. There is no requirement to grow a beard according to the Quran. It says that cleanliness certainly is important, that when you rise, you should, to do a prayer, you should wash your face, your forearms to the elbows, wipe over your heads and feet to the ankles. And the Hadith says cleanliness is half of faith. But what's this about the right and left hand? It's very interesting. So I went to Islam question and answer so I could get it all on one page for you. And it says established principle in Sharia. So there are many hadith that support this. Is that which has to do with honor and nobility, such as putting on your pants and shoes, entering the mosque, using the toothbrush, putting on kohl, clipping your nails, trimming your mustache, combing your hair, plucking your armpits, etc. here. Exiting the toilet, eating and drinking, shaking hands, all of these things, it's mustahab, which is recommended to start on the right foot or use the right hand. As for things which are the opposite, such as entering the toilet, exiting the mosque, cleaning yourself after using the toilet, it's recommended to use the left. Now you can see where this is going to be a massive problem for hospitals, is trying to accommodate this. So here's a couple of examples from the Hadith. And here is a booklet that's given out in Canadian schools. And this one's from British Columbia, I believe, about how to provide care to Muslims. And body rituals, there have been requests in the workplace for washing facilities and wearing flip-flops to the office so they can more easily wash their face or do their ablutions. The hospital in Paris, in the case study, male patients were refused to be cleaned by female nurses. And this strained hospital resources and led to patient care delays. So I was mentioning beards they're not even mentioned in the Quran, that you need to grow a beard. And according to boxing, okay, boxers are supposed to be clean shaven, and so are many other professions. They're supposed to be clean shaven. And the Council on American Islamic Relations did file a complaint on behalf of this boxer. Now, the Boxing Association does provide exemptions, waivers on a case-by-case basis. They have to apply for each match. And this man had wanted to get several matches in one day and one waiver for all of them. And they said, no, you have to apply for each one. And he didn't do that. So CARE filed a legal complaint. But, you know, if it's not even in the Quran, we're only looking at the Hadith here. the Prophet also said, Jews and Christians do not dye their beards, so act differently from them. So I suppose that's a reason to dye your beard. He also said, from the Hadith, Umar was dyeing his beard yellow, and when he was asked about that, he said he saw Muhammad dyeing his beard yellow. And Umar also trimmed his beard. And these are all from the Hadith. So this man is relying on the Hadith here and saying that he should grow a beard, but he's not saying that he needs to dye it yellow. So this is inconsistent. And part of it is that in the West, people don't really understand the significance of markers like beards. So in the Arab world, and this is an excellent article from the CBC, I recommend it, and the Middle East Eye. It says, in the Arab and Muslim world, facial hair is a sociological signifier. And the Muslim Brotherhood generally tends to wear a full but well-groomed beard. The Salafists, this very conservative Muslims, like to let their beard grow long and wild. And some even dye their beards with henna. Now, Mubarak, and this is Egypt, he was there ruling 1980 to 2011. He considered this a threat to his reign, and he tried to cut back on that. But now civil servants across the country are calling for the ban to be lifted, and they're saying this is an issue of civil rights and freedom of expression. But Mubarak considered it a threat because of this sociological signifier. So there, in this article, man had met with a woman he'd not seen in a long time. He had his son with him, and she didn't offer to shake his hand. And later, the father said to her, you know, why didn't you shake my son's hand? And she answered, she said, she assumed that the son's facial hair was symbolic of a deep Islamic religiousness, and was afraid if she offered her hand to shake that he wouldn't take it. So Tajikistan also considers the beard a social signifier and has cracked down on both the beard and the hijab. And Egypt has also reinforced a campaign against the beard. So physical contact, and I mean, these are Islamic countries that are cracking down on the beards. Physical contact, 26% of managers reported refusal of a contact with a coworker. And what the Quran says actually is for women to abide in their houses and do not display yourselves, as was the display in former times of ignorance. And this is happening in Afghanistan, places where, you know, Sharia is followed very closely. And in the Hadith, Muhammad never touched the palm of a woman. He didn't take a woman's hand. And he said, a woman should not travel except with a mahram, and that is an unmarriageable male. And that is also enforced in Afghanistan. So the survey found that cultural norms clash with workplace etiquette. In Holland, there were employees refusing to shake hands with female colleagues for religious reasons. And in Sweden, there was a case that went to court. A woman was applying for a job and she refused to shake the hand of the person doing the interview. And it went to court because they didn't give her the job and the company had to pay her $6,000 in compensation. This example here was a gentleman who wasn't getting along too well at work. He wouldn't shake hands. Some of the women did feel offended. So it was a little problematic. You can read the whole thing here if you want. But when he was laid off, along with a number of non-Muslims owing to budgetary restraints, he felt this was probably, he was singled out. But there were a lot of others that were laid off at the same time. But he filed suit, and the outcome was the court did rule in favor of the school district. Now back to physical contact. Here it's becoming more and more of a problem in Europe where it wasn't before. And they have this book that here is actually from Australia on how Muslim patients should be handled. And this is an example. It's a video of doctors being trained to prevent attacks from Muslim migrants. And in France here, this article, it's from the book I showed you earlier, Halal, that 2 gynecologists were caring for Muslim women giving birth, and they were physically attacked and injured in the hospital. on the grounds that male doctors should not have examined their wives. And the doctors have filed charges, but they're concerned for Muslim women. And just yesterday, I was seeing on LinkedIn that male doctors are no longer allowed to treat women in Afghanistan at all. And because they're not allowed to get an education either, according to the doctrine, they can be married at age 6. There's no one to provide medical care for women at all anymore. And this fellow who wrote this article, he said 30 years ago, as a doctor, he said 30 years ago, Muslim women attended our hospitals with no fear of being cared for by male doctors, and there were no problems, no violence. Why this regression? Well, why indeed? Proselytizing. Survey found 19% of managers complained of overt religiosity, identified proselytizing as problematic. And, according to the doctrine, Muslim is supposed to try and share, promote Islam if possible. It says to invite people, argue with them in a way that is best. And the Hadith agrees with this. But remember that the Quran does say that Muslims must not take the believers as friends. And it says that 13 times. Whoever does that has nothing to do with Allah. Now, this is happening in a UK school here, this proselytizing in the schoolroom. This young boy is feeling peer pressure, and he is saying the Shahada. And the Shahada is the profession of faith, and that's all you have to do to become a Muslim. And I'll play it for you here.
I bear witness that there is no God, but Allah, and I bear witness, that Muhammad, peace be upon him, I bear witness.
So they found there were complaints of workplace proselytizing causing tension, and in a UK call center, the employees complained about their Muslim colleagues frequently discussing religion, and there was enforcement of no proselytizing policies. Sports centers, schools, jails have been identified as vehicles for proselytizing and radicalization. And schools, this is from Montreal in Quebec, Canada, and they found that some teachers there, 11 teachers, have been suspended. And for several years now, they have been introducing Sharia in the schools. Now we move on to jihad. Now, the survey found that 95% of employers consider radicalization a security risk. And from the Quran, kill the polytheists wherever you find them, capture, besiege them, lie in wait for them at every place of ambush. And from the Hadith, Allah's messenger said, that's Muhammad said, a man asked Muhammad, instruct me to such a deed as equals jihad in reward. And Muhammad said, I do not find such a deed. Now, Muhammad did often say that respecting your mother and father was the highest deed, but also that jihad was the highest deed. And certainly jihad, unlike beards, which are not mentioned in the Quran at all, jihad is mentioned frequently. And someone who is killed in jihad will go straight to paradise. All sins forgiven. So the compendium, the Book of Islamic Law, it says the good is what the lawgiver, Allah or his messenger, says is good. And the measure of good and bad is sacred law, not reason. And again, I showed you this at the beginning, what Muhammad said and did. This is the ordained way of Sharia. And you saw what Muhammad said and did. And that is he was a jihadi. So Jihad, the French private security firms found that there was that radicalized employees had access to sensitive sites, and that radical ideology jeopardized workplace safety. So the outcome was that there was enhanced vetting and monitoring procedures. And what the Quran says, you are the best nation produced for mankind. You enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. So a large amount of the doctrine addresses jihad. Now in Mecca, as I said, there was no talk of jihad. It wasn't until Muhammad migrated to Medina and adopted jihad and became a politician and a military leader a quarter of that portion of the Quran is about jihad. The biography I showed you, the Sirah of Muhammad, and that's a very good one. 2/3 of it is about jihad, and the Hadith of just Bukhari, a fifth of it, is about jihad. Now, the point is that if something is obligatory, is required, it is considered a religious requirement in Islam. And Muhammad had the 5 pillars, but he also had this: I command you with 5. Listen and obey, jihad, hijra, that's migration, and the jama, that's the prayer. So this is a jihad-tied Islamic group in New Jersey schools. Teachers were converted and trained to enforce Sharia. And this was managed by the Islamic Circle of North America. So this is actually stealth jihad, and a group with documented ties to terrorism, as they have, pushed its Islamic agenda, indoctrinating educators with Sharia principles disguised as inclusivity. Now, this is from the explanatory memorandum of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, which was submitted to court in the Holy Land Foundation trial when a cache of Muslim Brotherhood documents were found and submitted as evidence. In stealth jihad, the concerns were from the survey: airline and airport vulnerability, Salafism at Paris Transit Authority, risks of radicalized employees in security roles, and the impact of proponents using French labor unions for strategic gain. Now, from the classic manual of Islamic law I showed you, what does it say about jihad? It says it is the obligatory character of jihad. It is a communal obligation. And he who provides the equipment for a soldier in jihad has himself performed jihad. So there's many ways to perform jihad. It can be done, through money, through speech, through writing, there are many methods. Those of the believers who are unhurt but sit behind are not equal to those who fight in Allah's path with their property and their lives. And this is from the Quran 495. To look at this explanatory memorandum again, in section 4, it says to understand the role of the Muslim Brother in North America is the process of settlement. It is the civilization jihadi process with all the word means. That the Ikhwan, that's Muslim Brotherhood, must understand their work in America is a kind of grand jihad, destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so is eliminated, and God's religion, Islam, is made victorious over all other religions. So by the same measure that we're currently using for religion being a protected category, jihad, slavery, killing unbelievers are also civil rights on that basis. It is considered obligatory in Islam, and beards are not, but jihad is. So it says here, and this is Ohio again, I believe. Yes, Ohio. And their website said, it is illegal for an employer to discriminate against an employee on the basis of religion. Well, this is part of the religion. And the question is that, do people understand what that religion includes? So here's an example from CARE, California. And they recently celebrated their 12th annual Muslim Day with over 400 participants and nearly 100 elected officials, including Governor Newsom. And they were building support for key legislative priorities, and the priorities included 3 CARE-sponsored bills, which passed the state assembly, were signed into law, making a significant victory for our community, CARE says. But do these elected officials actually have any idea of what Sharia includes? So surveys have identified the risk of workplace Islamization, and that Islam seeks to influence workplace norms through persistent demands. And the cost of accommodation extends beyond economics to include social cohesion risks. The examples include economic and ideological encroachment in the corporate sector, economic costs from prayer breaks and lawsuits, increased demands and conflicts in Western workplaces, accusations of Islamophobia exploited, workplace infiltration by jihadis, whether violent or stealth, non-compliance with medical exams, rise in demands for gender segregation, prayer rooms, halal meals. And the future implications, the risks of inaction include increased economic costs, workplace tensions, and jihad itself. So here we have a map of the world. In the blue, the dark blue, these are the world's most tolerant countries. And the red and the orange here, these are the least tolerant countries. And when these countries adopt Sharia, accommodate Sharia, okay, they're actually transforming themselves into less tolerant countries, not more tolerant. So it is the values we cherish that make us so vulnerable. And this is how countries are Islamized, how they are transformed from being tolerant, free countries into intolerant ones. So I'll close with a few words about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, most people think that the UN follows this and that all the member states follow this, and that's not the case. Now, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that everyone is entitled to their rights, including freedom of religion and language, etc. And of course, you know, there is no freedom of religion in Islam, and I should have mentioned that earlier. It says no one should be held in slavery or servitude. Now, in 1948, they could be forgiven for believing that everyone would eventually adopt this, but that didn't happen. The Islamic states did not sign on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they have the largest voting bloc at the UN. They are very wealthy, and they have a great deal of influence because of the Ummah, the global community of Muslims. And they follow the Cairo Declaration, and the Cairo Declaration is based on Sharia, and it was introduced in 1990. And it says that everyone has the right to enjoy rights and freedoms without prejudice to the principles of Islam, that is Sharia. And so this large voting bloc is actually following a different declaration, although they vote on resolutions, they sit on committees, they chair committees. And it's entirely opposite to this. There is no equality before the law in Islam. There is no freedom of religion. Apostates can be killed, and slavery still exists. There's slavery in Iraq, there's slavery in Niger. There's been 14 centuries of slavery. And of course, people don't really know this. I was recently looking at a Canadian school book that's 20 years old, and it shows the slave trade, and it shows only the Atlantic slave trade, whereas there was slave trade in Arabia that it has really, it was massive, and it brought people from Africa, people from Europe, European slaves. It was huge, and it's gone on to some degree for 14 centuries. And several of the Islamic countries didn't even adopt slavery laws at all until late 20th century. So this is my website, and I hope you'll check it out. It has a great deal of good information on it. On the front page is all the Islamic doctrine. You can find it all. There's a tutorial teaching you how to search it yourself, because that's best, is just to look at it yourself. What does it really say? And this is my book. I published it last summer, and Timeless Essays About Islam and Its Doctrine. And it concludes with 10 recommendations. And I hope you'll have a look. And thank you very much for watching this presentation. I hope you'll share it.